so some news coming from Zimbabwe is that the country announced its adoption of a new currency that is backed by gold. The currency is currently said to be trading stronger than the rand. ZIG, which is short for Zimbabwe Gold, was rolled out to replace the Zimbabwean dollar, which has been struggling in value for years. So is this a hit or miss for the people of Zimbabwe? Well, to unpack this, we are joined now by Farai Marapira, who is the spokesperson for ZANU-PF. We're also joined here at home by trader and founder of Herenya Capital Advisors, Petri Redelinghuys. Gentlemen, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Farai, I'm going to let you have the first take here, right? Why it was important in your view, according to ZANU-PF, that the ruling party, that what the Zimbabwe economy needs at this point is a new currency. Let's start there with just setting the tone.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's important that a country should have its own currency, as this is generally known, makes it easier for export and imports. And when you have your own currency, it's easier to make decisions on growing your own economy and certain factors like that. And it's a matter of autonomy. As a country, we need to have our own currency. We need to have our own identity, and having our own currency is part of that, just like most of the countries around the world. So we sat down and worked on the best way in which to launch a currency that cannot be attacked by speculators and other methods that have been used. You know, as a country under sanctions, there are so many ways of getting parallel attacks even on your currency. So we needed to find a way in which we launch a currency which is buffered against as many of these possible challenges as possible.
Yeah, but this isn't the first time that Zimbabwe has launched a currency, and this is part of the challenge really around some of the, I suppose, skepticism around the ZIG. You've seen multiple, in fact, currency launches in the country. You had the ZW dollar that was adopted at independence, the bearer check in 2005, the USD in 2009, the bond in 2016, the RTGS 2019 up until Feb, and now the ZIG in the ZIG at this point, but also there was the Zimbabwean local dollar. All of these not having performed well. So where do you base the confidence on the ZIG on?
As Zimbabwe, when we went under sanctions, we faced a lot of challenges, especially in our economy, and we've been treading a road that has not been walked by anyone before. So as we have been developing, we have found ways to ring-fence our economy, which is why you find that our economy has tripled in size since 2018, from a $16 billion economy to a $47 billion economy. These are facts that are recognized and respected by even international institutions like the IMF. So we have been developing over the years, and we have had challenges which no other country has had, and we have had to be ingenious, and we have had to think outside of the box until we have reached this point. So right now we're at a stage where we now know how to circumvent most of these challenges that we are facing. And basing our currency on actual reserves is one of the ways in which we can protect it from asymmetrical warfare and other things that happened to our currency launches in the past.
Okay, what is your understanding of the gold reserves that are held by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe at the moment, Farai?
Our gold reserves are actually at present triple our currency requirements. That's point number one. And we've been accumulating by converting 10% of every mineral exported into gold. So this is how we are. We have accumulated our reserves, and we continue to accumulate them. And our currency will always be based on what is actually there, and we'll have independent auditors yearly coming to audit our reserves, and this will be made public. Transparency is necessary for this currency to be known, to be trusted, and this is exactly what we're going to do. Yeah. So we'll not be auditing ourselves. We'll be inviting in respected auditors to come and audit yearly when the Reserve Bank does its reports. So they'll come in yearly and do an audit of the reserves that are there, and we'll develop from there.
Okay, Petri, I'm going to bring you in here because obviously we need to speak about the economics of this. And for a lot of us, we may not even understand some of the mathematics and economics, and perhaps you can help us with that. But your initial thought on hearing about the launch of the ZIG, how well it's performing. I mean, I think on Friday it was trading at around 18 rand to the ZIG, which is, a considerable amount there. So are you confident in the ZIG's ability to sustain those numbers? Let's start there.
Okay, so good morning, firstly, and thank you for having me. And I want to just echo some of the sentiments that Farai just shared. I think that, the currency essentially has intrinsic value because of the fact that it's backed by gold, right? That is something that at this stage no other currency has. This is how it used to be pre sort of the 1970s when the gold standard was abolished. So for a large part, the currency's value, or a country's currency's value, like South Africa's, for example, is really kind of determined by how many other people want it, supply and demand, right? Mm-hmm. As we're here, the value of the ZIG is valued by that gold reserve really is the value, right?
Right.
There's going to be a few challenges. As the currency is more adopted, and I see the Reserve Bank is doing all sorts of very sort of smart things in order to get people to start using this currency as a way to pay tax, for example. So it forces circulation, it generates income, and it kind of converts or pushes people onto using this currency as their primary currency, because a lot of the transactions are still happening in US dollars. So and that, for at least from my understanding, will still be allowed for some time. Just as time goes by, there'll be a requirement to do more and more of your transactions with government, so pay your taxes, for example, with this currency, and then in turn that sort of increases the circulation of it. So as the economy grows, the question is, can the gold pile or the reserve grow fast enough? And I think there's a number of things that we forget about Zimbabwe. One, there is an enormous, and I mean an enormous amount of natural reserves, including gold, in Zimbabwe, ready to be mined. I think that Zimbabwe has been through a lot, okay? We have seen Zimbabwe has essentially been the world's prime example of what happens if you just print too much money, right? We've seen that happen again and again and again. I think that the people of Zimbabwe are at a point where they are, that they've been battered enough to be serious about turning this economy around. So while I think that the ZIG is an enormous catalyst for that, a potential catalyst for that, and I think that the ZIG in itself has true intrinsic value, because the more the value of gold goes up, the more the value of this currency goes up. I think it's interesting to see that Zimbabwe does this first, when there has been an enormous amount of talk over the last couple of years around a potential BRICS currency and a precious metal-backed, multi-country BRICS currency. So perhaps Zimbabwe again serves as an example of the positive impacts of going back to the gold standard, right? They have to essentially just curb inflation. And have an economic environment that's stable. What I do think, so all of these things I think is really very, very good. Basically what it comes down to now is that Zimbabwean government just don't mess up, right? That's basically it. The situation Zimbabwe is in is for many reasons, sanctions being, very high on that list. But also it's been mismanagement, and it's the story of South Africa, right? We in South Africa look at Zimbabwe and we think, well, this is what could potentially happen if we don't manage essentially this transition that we've been going through for the last 30 years. If we don't manage this correctly, this is the potential outcome. And I think that maybe Zimbabwe at this stage, serves as an example for us to look at. Well, okay, maybe there's sense to doing this gold standard thing, right? Because that's how it used to be. That's how our currency was. So, yes, if you look at the ZIG, it's, about as strong as the dollar, because it's backed literally by gold. So the challenge I think that Zimbabwe is going to have is twofold. One, they need to ensure that, from a historical perspective, there's not a lot of trust in the government that they're actually, not super corrupt. So that is something that needs to be dealt with. Essentially, government needs to put their money where their mouth is and, run things in the best possible interest of the people, which I think is potentially at a point now where that is starting to happen. The gravy train has left the station. It's wreaked absolute havoc. Everybody knows that. And I think people on all levels, from grassroots to within government, are at a point where they're really serious about turning this around. So that's fantastic news.
Right.
And two, the currency just needs to be able to, the gold reserve needs to be able to grow as fast as the economy, because what's going to happen, and as Farai points out, GDP is going to skyrocket as soon as Zimbabwe starts to become a bit more stable. It has been battered down. It is an enormously resourceful place in terms of food resources, or the ability to grow food, as well as natural sort of resources and precious metals. So if they get this formula right, they can become extremely, extremely prosperous in a relatively short period of time, and I mean like 20 years, right? It takes a long time to build essentially these types of things, but also it happens quite a bit faster than what we realize. 20 years goes pretty quick, and I think that they can make a lot of progress in that time. We do need to be realistic. It's not going to be, fairyland by next year, but 5 years from now we'll start seeing some real massive improvements to the quality of life of the average Zimbabwean, I think. So it's really just the biggest challenge at this stage is, can they keep it stable, and can they keep that gold reserve fast enough?
Right.
Or grow that gold reserve fast enough. And if they're smart with their mining industry, they can.
Yeah, because the biggest concern, of course, is just how big those gold reserves are that the Reserve Bank really does have. I mean, there's numbers that are being touted that are between, 2.5 tons, and then there's, 1.1, and then there's numbers that used to be at 35. So there's clarity there. And, of course, Farai, you've talked about how those annual audits will assist. But I want to bring this in. What does the situation now look like on the ground, Farai? Because essentially what we've seen now with the ZIG is that you haven't actually had the physical, I suppose, interpretation of the currency as yet, right? And that it is still quite an electronic currency that's being used at the moment. So time frames where that is concerned about when we're going to see those notes and coins then hitting the ground. And then I think the biggest one is your message to South Africans that the 2 million, the 2 million Zimbabwean nationals that are living in South Africa as a result of the tough economic times, can they be optimistic that the ZIG is going to turn the economy around for their home country?
Well, we have launched the ZIG because the economy is already turning around. Like I said, we have moved from a $16 billion economy in 2018, and we are currently a $47 billion economy. We are in the top 5 growing economies in Africa. So the fact of Zimbabwe moving forward or backward, the answer is clear that we're moving forward. And we've realized our mistakes, and we've realized the challenges that affect the public confidence with the banking system, such as excessive bank charges. Someone puts in a deposit, and then instead of gaining interest as is normal, it was being eroded. So we've put in the measures to ensure that deposits are now gaining in value. If someone deposits, we're going to have interest rates that are commensurate with the region and the world. So these are some of the measures we have had to put in place because we need to do things properly. We are at a stage where we are now feeling very confident as a people about the direction our country is taking. Even if you look at it, the number of naysayers is getting less and less by the day because the infrastructural development that is happening in Zimbabwe, the mining development, you've seen what lithium has happened in Zimbabwe. We're looking at one of the biggest steel plants, if not the biggest steel plants, launching in June here in Zimbabwe. So these are the things that are creating the confidence, and these are the things that are going to be backing our currency, because it's not only our gold export, but every mineral we export. 10% of the proceeds that the government receives from every mineral exported will be tendered to the reserves.
Yeah.
And this, as well as managing how we release our currency and expand it, will ensure that we always maintain our currency within the strictures of the reserves that we have. And this is why we need independent auditors, so that any level of distrust with the process is dealt with.
Let me ask you this before I let you go, and I'm really squeezing this in because I'm out of time, Farai. This is for you. You talked about sanctions really being the massive hindrance over the years for Zim. But at the moment, though, we know the changes in the sanction program by the U.S. on Zim. And essentially what that has meant is that instead of the nation now being sanctioned, the sanctions really are just on individuals and certain organizations. But one of those individuals, of course, is the president of Zim. Is that going to continue to be a problem that you're concerned with for the country?
The original sanctions against Zimbabwe are the ZIG sanctions. Those have not been removed. Those sanctions still remain. What was changed was the presidential executive orders on sanctions. And if the sanctions are on the president of a country, that affects even any investor confidence within that country. So to say that the sanctions are only on the president when he's effectively the CEO of our country, it's a bit absurd. It's not just an individual. A president is not just an individual. He is the face of the country. He is the leader of the country. And he's the one who exudes confidence in anyone who wants to parley with your country. So I think that was just a lot of trash that the Americans were trying to peddle when they were saying there were any substantive changes on their sanctions regime. Okay. Until ZIG is gone, until all sanctions are gone, we're still under sanctions. We don't need any modified lipstick on a donkey to stop calling it a donkey. These sanctions are unilateral. They're against all international laws. The Americans have, in their own sitting, decided to sanction Zimbabwe without the consent and the acceptance of all the world countries as it should be.
Okay. Farai, I'm going to have to leave it there. And Petri, thank you so much for speaking to us. Petri, fortunately, you ask one question and your answers are quite a lot of them, which we do appreciate that, Petri. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Petri Redelinghuys is the trader and founder of Herenya Capital Advisors, giving us the economic view of this new currency in Zim. It's called Zimbabwe Gold, or ZIG, thanks to Farai Marapira, who is the spokesperson for ZANU-PF, the governing party in Zimbabwe.